The Grandview Hotel stood at the corner of Fifth and Morrison, all marble and deliberate grandeur. It was the kind of building designed to remind you the moment you walked through its doors that some places weren't built for everyone. They were built for the people who mattered. The lobby stretched out like a promise someone else had made. Crystal chandeliers that cost more than most cars. Floor tiles polished to the point of reflecting faces back at their owners. Golden trim everywhere, catching the light, throwing it around like the hotel had something to prove. Marcus Webb had been here before, a week ago actually. He'd come to consult on the East Wing ventilation system, a job that had taken 4 hours, paid him enough to cover 2 weeks of groceries, and Emma's new sketchbooks. That was the math his life ran on now. Small numbers, specific purposes, nothing wasted. He'd left his tools bag behind, forgot it in the mechanical room, discovered the absence only when he got home to his apartment. Emma had asked him about it. "Why don't you have your bag?" "Dad." She noticed those things. Emma noticed when things were missing. She noticed when things were broken. She was 6 years old, and she was more observant than most adults, which was both beautiful and heartbreaking, in ways Marcus had learned not to think about too directly. Now, on a Tuesday evening in October, he stood in the Grandview's lobby with his daughter holding his hand. The sick feeling in his stomach had nothing to do with the hotel. "I don't want to wait with Mrs. Chen again," Emma had said that morning. Mrs. Chen was their neighbor, a kind woman in her 70s. She made cookies. She asked Emma questions about school. Most kids would have been fine with that. Emma wasn't most kids. Emma had learned something between her mother's death 3 years ago and Marcus's job loss 14 months ago. She had learned that the world was less stable than it appeared. She preferred to be where she could see her father. "It's just a quick errand," Marcus had told her. 10 minutes, in and out. She'd held out her hand. "Then let's go fast." So here they were. Emma in her small navy jacket. Her dark hair, exactly his dark hair, pulled back in a ponytail she'd done herself this morning. With varying degrees of success. She gripped his hand with both of hers, the way she always did when nervous. Her other hand held a small notebook and a pencil, tucked into her jacket pocket, just in case she got bored. Emma didn't like being bored. Boredom meant time to think, and Emma had learned to prefer distraction. Marcus looked down at his own appearance. Gray work jacket, work shirt underneath sleeves rolled up, jeans that had been clean that morning, now marked with a day's worth of living, boots that had seen every kind of floor a hotel could produce, concrete in basements, polished tile in lobbies, industrial linoleum in kitchens. The boots were scuffed. Practical. Honest. He carried no briefcase, no designer anything, just the practical weight of tools when he found them, and the invisible weight of everything else. The job he'd lost. The apartment that was exactly the right size for 2 people who'd learned to need very little. The constant math of making it work. The receptionist at the front desk was young, maybe 23, with the kind of studied cheerfulness that came from hospitality training. Marcus had seen that expression before. It meant you weren't in the category of people who deserved the real smile. "Hi there," Marcus said. "I'm Marcus Webb. I was here last week for a consultation on the East Wing systems. I left a tools bag in the mechanical room. Should still be there." The receptionist's smile didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Calculation. Reevaluation. Marcus was used to this. The moment when people decided whether he was someone they needed to be nice to. "Of course," she said. Can you wait 1 moment? I'll have someone bring it down." That was fine. That was better than fine. It meant they could be out of here in 5 minutes instead of 10. Emma was holding his hand tighter now. She was looking around the lobby with careful attention, the kind of attention that belonged to someone cataloging exits and potential threats. Marcus recognized the behavior. He'd taught it to her, indirectly, through the simple fact of being her father in a world that wasn't always safe for people like them. The elevator doors opened, and that's when everything changed. Natalie Ashford had been planning this for 3 months, but the decision to actually do it had only come in the last week. That's how things worked when you had money and power. You could contemplate change for months, and then you could execute it in days. She'd acquired the Grandview 18 months ago through a holding company with a name that meant nothing to anyone who wasn't paying careful attention to the right documents in the right places. The acquisition was clean, precise, entirely invisible to the staff and management of the property she now owned. That had been intentional. She wanted to watch first, before she decided what to do. What she'd watched in 18 months had not impressed her. She'd reviewed quarterly reports, showing revenue steady but declining. She'd read staff complaint logs that documented customer service failures with increasing frequency. She'd monitored the gap between the service her brand promised. Inclusive, welcoming, built for everyone. And the service her brand actually delivered. The gap had been widening. She'd seen it first in the numbers, then in the details behind the numbers. The complaint categories that kept recurring, the maintenance issues that had been documented but not resolved, the pattern of reviews that described a hotel whose surfaces were impeccable, and whose substance had been quietly hollowing out for years. Natalie was 26 years old, and almost no one in the Grandview had ever seen her face. She sat in the hired car now, waiting, thinking through the logistics of what she was about to do. The wheelchair was already with her, a manual one, practical, nothing about it suggesting wealth or special treatment. She'd used it on and off since a spinal cord injury at 22, sustained in a car accident that had reshaped her entire understanding of the world. Some days her legs worked well enough. Some days they didn't. Today, for the purposes of her experiment, they didn't. Her reservation was under her own name. She'd booked it herself through the public booking system 2 days ago, the same way any guest would. Room 412. The system had flagged it immediately as an accessible accommodation. She had the confirmation on her phone. She didn't plan to need it. She'd been wrong about that before. The driver opened her door. Natalie transferred into the wheelchair with practiced efficiency. Someone who'd been doing it for 4 years. No ceremony, no discussion, just movement. She'd asked him to drop her at the main entrance, not at the accessible side entrance, not the one marked with the blue wheelchair symbol, near the service delivery bay. That choice was deliberate. She wanted to see what happened at the front door. She wanted to see what the Grandview looked like, from the perspective of someone the staff had already decided didn't matter. The lobby opened before her like a promise someone else had written, and she wheeled through it, with the calm attention of a woman who was about to test whether anyone in this building understood what they were supposed to be doing. The receptionist looked up from his screen. He saw her first, the wheelchair, the disability, the immediate categorization. That happened in the space of a breath. Then he saw her face. Then he looked back at his screen for an uncomfortably long time. Marcus noticed this. He was good at noticing things. It was part of why he'd been good at his old job, the one he'd lost 14 months ago. He'd noticed things about building systems that management didn't want noticed. He'd documented maintenance deferrals that were supposed to stay quiet. He'd refused to sign off on projects that would fail, and then they'd let him go, politely, with the kind of professionalism that made it clear, you can't work here if you're going to see what's actually broken. Now he watched a woman in a wheelchair approach the same receptionist, and he saw the exact moment the calculation happened. The moment the man decided she was a problem to be solved, rather than a guest to be served. "Good evening," the receptionist said. His voice carried the same practiced cheerfulness he'd offered Marcus moments before, but with something different underneath it, something softer, the way people spoke to children, or to animals they weren't sure about. "Welcome to the Grandview. How can I help you? I have a reservation," the woman said, Her voice was quiet, steady, under Natalie Ashford, room 412. The receptionist's fingers moved across his keyboard. His eyes moved across his screen. He looked at her. He looked at the screen again. The pause stretched out, long enough to contain entire conversations. I'm so sorry, he said finally. There's been a system error. The room you booked, the accessible room, it's been reassigned. I'm not sure how that happened, but the system is showing it as unavailable at this time. Natalie said nothing. She watched him the way a bird watches something it hasn't decided about yet. Her eyes didn't change. Her expression didn't shift. The quality of her attention was invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. She'd developed this over years of being underestimated, and had found it consistently useful. Before she could respond, a man appeared from somewhere behind the front desk. He was 35, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that suggested he'd been trained to manage situations, before they became visible ones. This was Devin Carter, the shift manager. His voice was calibrated just below commanding, as if restraint itself were a form of authority. "Ms.," he said, approaching with a smile that had been practiced in a mirror. "Ashford," she said. "Ms. Ashford, I want to be transparent with you." He used the word transparent the way politicians used it, meaning the opposite. "Our standard rooms aren't really set up for—" He paused, his eyes moving to her wheelchair, then back to her face. "Extended mobility needs. Between you and me, our accessible room is really more suitable for someone with more severe limitations." The words landed like stones in still water. More severe, as if disability came in acceptable grades, as if some people were disabled enough to deserve accommodation, and others were just being difficult. "My reservation specified accessible accommodation," Natalie said quietly. "Yes, and we sincerely apologize for the confusion. But what we want to do here is ensure your experience is optimal. There are some wonderful properties nearby, very close actually, that might be better suited to your particular situation." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. He'd heard this before, not in hotels, but in medical offices, in school applications, in conversations about what people like him could realistically expect from the world. The careful courtesy that was actually careful contempt. The smile that didn't reach the eyes. The suggestion that if you didn't fit the expected shape of things, maybe you should just go somewhere else. Emma pulled at his hand. "Daddy," she said, her child's voice cutting through the ambient lobby noise with the clarity that only a child's voice can manage. When it asks the hard question, why won't they let her in? The temperature around the front desk changed. Guests turned from their conversations. The corporate group wearing matching lanyards, some kind of conference event, Marcus guessed, paused in their movement toward the elevators. The lobby had been busy enough that one woman being denied a room was just another transaction. But a child's question, asked with complete innocence and perfect clarity, transformed the moment into something everyone could see. Devin's smile remained in place, but something in his eyes shifted. He'd been trained for objections. He hadn't been trained for being understood by a 6-year-old. "Well," he said, his voice taking on an edge of false patience. "Sometimes accommodations require planning ahead. We do our best to—" "She has a reservation," Emma said. She wasn't being rude. She was just stating facts. "And you said you don't have the room she booked." Marcus's hand moved to his daughter's shoulder. He should tell her to be quiet. He should nod apologetically to Devin. He should accept the referral to some other hotel. He should do what he always did, which was keep his head down and keep moving and not make things worse. But Emma's hand was gripping his, with both of hers now, and she was looking up at him with a question that went deeper than just, why won't they let her in? She was asking something else entirely. What do we do when we see something wrong? Marcus had been standing in the lobby for less than 5 minutes, and he'd already understood the situation. in its entirety. The shape of it was familiar. He'd seen it before, in the way his old company had decided that maintenance failures didn't need to be documented if management didn't want to know about them, in the way Emma's school had suggested she might be more comfortable in a different program, in the subtle architecture of a world that decided some people mattered more than others, and then made that decision seem inevitable. He could leave. He had his tools bag. He could take Emma back home. They could make dinner. Something simple. Pasta with tomato sauce, the kind she liked. They could do homework. They could have a bath. They could read before bed. They had their life, the one they'd built together in these tight quarters. And it was good. It was small, and it was careful, and it was working. But Emma was looking up at him, not angry, not even particularly upset, just confused, just asking the question that 6-year-olds asked before they learned that the world didn't always make sense, and that pointing out the nonsense wouldn't change anything. Marcus had been 34 when he'd lost his job. He'd been good at it, genuinely good, the kind of good that gets noticed and resented by the people who notice it. He'd documented maintenance deferrals. That should have been fixed. He'd raised concerns about deferred work that management wanted to ignore. He'd refused to sign off on systems that would fail, and then they'd fired him, quietly, with the kind of professionalism that made it clear. You can't work here if you're the kind of person who sees what's actually broken and refuses to look away. For 14 months now, Marcus had been trying to look away. Not from buildings. He still fixed those, took consulting jobs where he could, found a strange kind of satisfaction in making things work that people had decided didn't matter. But from situations like this, from confrontations that didn't affect him directly, from fights that weren't his to fight. But Emma had asked a question, and the question had traveled through the lobby and reached people who'd been trained not to see what was in front of them. The lanyard group was definitely watching now. People were pulling out phones. The soft ambient noise of the hotel had shifted into something else, the sound of a moment becoming visible. Marcus looked at the woman in the wheelchair. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching Devon, with an expression so still it was almost invisible. Cataloging, understanding, not asking for help, just recording the fact that help was being offered. He thought about Emma's mother, about how she'd died 3 years ago, and how Marcus had spent every day since, trying to be everything to a small person who'd lost so much, how he'd chosen a job that would let him be home when she needed him, which had meant giving up the career trajectory, the salary, the respect of people who valued those things. He thought about the moment he'd realized he couldn't do both, be the person who fixed broken systems and be the father his daughter needed him to be, and how he'd chosen, with the kind of clarity that came from knowing what mattered. He thought about what Emma was learning, in this moment, about what grown-ups did when they saw something wrong. "No," he said quietly, not to Devon, just into the moment itself. He moved toward the front desk. Emma walked beside him, still holding his hand, her small face serious, with the weight of something she understood, without language for it. Marcus walked slowly, not aggressive. That would have given Devon an excuse to call security, to frame this as a problem guest rather than a failure of hospitality, just present, just undeniable. He stood beside the woman in the wheelchair and looked directly at Devon. "She has a confirmed reservation," he said quietly. "Room 412. Accessible accommodation. You told her there was a system error." But there wasn't an error, was there? Devon's smile didn't change, but something in his bearing shifted. A subtle stiffening, a recalibration of the situation. This wasn't supposed to happen. A stranger wasn't supposed to insert himself into a transaction that wasn't his business. That was bad for the script Devon had memorized. That was bad for the way these things were supposed to go. "Sir, I understand your concern, but I'm not concerned," Marcus said, and there was something in his tone now. That made the Lanyard group put down their phones. And actually watch. "I'm stating a fact. She has a reservation. She has a confirmation. If there's an error, it's yours, not hers. And you're not telling her the room isn't available. You're telling her that she's not the right kind of guest. Those are different things." The lobby had gone almost entirely silent now. Even the elevator music seemed to be holding its breath. Devon's face hardened. The practiced courtesy dropped away, replaced by something colder. "If you're not a guest here, sir, I'm going to need to ask you to leave. Now." Emma squeezed Marcus's hand. He could feel her small fingers pressing into his palm, seeking ground, seeking certainty. Marcus had made a choice in this moment, and his daughter had walked right into it with him. He couldn't back down now. He couldn't tell her that he'd been wrong, that you did see something, and the right thing was to pretend you hadn't. He couldn't teach her that, not with his words or his actions. He pulled out his phone. It was an old model, nothing fancy, but it worked. He held it up, not pointing it at Devon, just letting him see that it was there, that documentation was possible. "I'm curious," Marcus said, his voice still quiet, still reasonable, "how this looks on social media. Man with daughter watches woman turned away from luxury hotel because staff decided her disability made her unsuitable. I'm guessing the Grandview's corporate office would want to know about that. Before everyone else did." The Lanyard group's phones reappeared. The receptionist looked at Devon. Devon looked at Marcus. The moment stretched. This was the pivot point. Either Devon capitulated, or he called security. Or he escalated this into something that would require official intervention. Either way, the hotel had lost control of the narrative. "Get her the room," Marcus said. Not a question. A statement of the new reality. Devon stood there for a long moment. His jaw worked. Then he turned to the receptionist. "Marcus, process Ms. Ashford's reservation immediately. Put her in room 412. If there's any issue, I want to know about it, now." The receptionist nodded quickly. He was already typing, already working to undo what had been decided moments before. The Lanyard group lowered their phones again, but something had shifted in the room. They would talk about this. They would tell the story. The Grandview's careful image had cracked, just slightly, and the crack was visible now. Emma looked up at Marcus. "We did it," she said. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "We did." But he was watching the woman in the wheelchair, and he was watching the way she was watching him. There was something in her attention that matched something in him. The quality of presence. That had nothing to do with proximity, and everything to do with genuine interest. In the person in front of you. A recognition of some kind. Not judgment. Understanding. She wasn't smiling. But something in her stillness had changed. After Marcus retrieved his tools bag, it was exactly where he'd left it. In the mechanical room. Undisturbed, he found himself in the service corridor, with the woman in his wheelchair, and Emma between them. The corridor was quieter than the lobby, all institutional tile and the soft hum of machinery that never stopped working, even when nobody was watching. The residual charge of the evening's confrontation sat behind them like weather that had already passed through. The adrenaline was fading now, replaced by something else. The sense of having crossed a line you couldn't uncross. "I appreciate what you did back there," the woman said. She was wheeling slowly, looking at the walls, at the exposed pipes, at the infrastructure. That nobody cared about, because it wasn't visible. But you should know that wasn't necessary. I would have handled it. "I know," Marcus said. He did know. There was something in the way she'd watched everything. Not passively, but with the attention of someone cataloging data, someone who understood systems, someone who had a plan. Then why did you step in? Emma had taken her free hand and rested it lightly on the arm of the woman's wheelchair, not gripping, just touching, the way a child reaches towards something. She's trying to understand. The woman didn't move away. Because she asked, Marcus said, glancing down at Emma. And because sometimes the reason you do something is just that you see it needs doing. The woman said nothing. They walked deeper into the corridor, and Marcus noticed things, because noticing things was what he did. The elevator in this wing was making a sound it shouldn't be making. One of the light fixtures was dimming and brightening in a rhythm. That suggested a failing ballast. The air temperature was inconsistent, which meant the HVAC zoning was off. These were all small things individually. Together they told a story about a building that was being maintained on the surface while failing underneath. I need to walk the property, the woman said. It wasn't a question. Are you willing? Why would you need to walk it? Because, she said, I own it. The words settled in the corridor, like stones dropping into still water. For a moment, nothing registered. Then Marcus understood what she'd said, and the shape of the evening reorganized itself in his mind. Everything made sense. The way she'd watched Devon, the way she'd documented the failures, the way she'd tested the system, and watched how it responded. You're the owner, Marcus said slowly. For 18 months, I bought it through holding companies that nobody connected the dots on. I wanted to watch the property. I wanted to understand what was being built here and what was being allowed to fail. And what did you find? That the surface is beautiful, she said, and the substance is hollow. They walked the property together. Marcus pointed out the failures. He could see the electrical panel that was running hot, the plumbing that showed signs of corrosion, the HVAC system that was working harder than it should be. The woman Natalie, she'd introduced herself now, and Marcus understood that was its own kind of power. Giving a name, in exchange for revelation, pointed out things Marcus had missed. The maintenance logs that were faked, the contractors who'd been paid for work. That was never done. The pattern of decisions that had been made to avoid spending money now, in exchange for risks later. 3 of these systems, she said, pulling out a card and writing down the 3 worst issues, will fail catastrophically within weeks if they're not addressed. The failure of one will cascade into the others. And then you have a building with no reliable electrical, no reliable water, no reliable air. Then you have a disaster. Why did you want to see it yourself? Marcus asked. Why the wheelchair? Why not just hire an inspector? Because I needed to understand what it felt like, Natalie said. To be invisible, to have my needs dismissed. I own this place, and the people in it looked at me like I was a problem. Imagine what they do to people who don't own anything. Imagine what assumptions they make. Emma walked between them, quiet, watching. She was good at watching. Marcus had realized over the past 6 years that he'd raised a daughter who understood more about the world than most children twice her age. She'd had to grow up fast. She'd had to learn to see what was actually happening underneath the surface-level conversation. Just like Marcus, just like Natalie, he suspected. I'll fix them, Marcus said, looking at the 3 items on the card, the failing components. But there's more beneath the first layer. There always is. I know, Natalie said. I want to walk the property first. Then we'll talk about the rest. The service corridor near the 3rd failing component was quieter than the others. Marcus opened the electrical panel and looked at the deteriorating capacitor inside. He could have fixed it right then. It would have taken 10 minutes. But the woman Natalie rolled her wheelchair closer, and something in the moment shifted. This wasn't just about the repair. This was about something else. You knew you owned this hotel when you checked in tonight, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I did? Natalie said. And you still let them turn you away? I needed to know what that felt like, she said. Being told I didn't belong in a place I owned. I needed to understand it in my body, not just in data. People look at me and they make decisions. I wanted to see if ownership changed those decisions. Marcus set down his tools. Did it know? It made them worse, actually, because now they were being carefully rude. Instead of openly dismissive, they were hiding their judgment, instead of being honest about it. She was quiet for a moment. Does this happen to you a lot? Being evaluated and found wanting. Every day, Marcus said. It was true. Every interaction now involved a moment where people decided what he was. Blue collar, therefore not very smart. Single parent, therefore struggling. Manual laborer with a child, therefore less than optimal. He'd learned to see the moment it happened, the slight shift in someone's attention when they categorized him. I've learned to live with it, he continued, because I don't have a choice. But someone like you with money and power, you have choices. You could use them. I know, Natalie said. That's why I'm here. That's why I needed to feel what it was like, not just know it intellectually. She paused. I'm going to hire you. For what? To audit my other properties. I have 4 others in the city. All of them probably have the same problem: good surfaces, failing substance. I want you to check them. I want you to see if the staff will discriminate against someone like me, and I want you to fix what's broken. Marcus thought about this. Consulting contracts, more than just freelance gigs, the possibility of something like stability. What's the catch, he asked. No catch, just honest work. But I need to know, are you the kind of person who would only do this for money? Or would you do it because it's right? I'm the kind of person, Marcus said slowly, who can't not fix things. I tried being the kind of person who looks away. It didn't work. I got fired for not being able to pretend the systems weren't broken. I know, Natalie said. That's why you're perfect for this. Emma sat down on the corridor floor, her notebook open, watching her father work. She didn't write anything. She just watched, with the focused attention of a child, learning how the world's problems actually got solved. The office on the 47th floor was the kind of space that said, "Power lives here." Floor-to-ceiling windows, city sprawling below, furniture that was expensive enough to be invisible, the kind of quality that didn't announce itself. Natalie wheeled behind her desk and gestured for Marcus to sit. He did, feeling the weight of the chair. Real leather, real wood, real money. Emma was downstairs with the concierge, looking at architectural blueprints with intense focus. Marcus had asked if she could come, and Natalie had said yes immediately, which was its own kind of power, not having to think about whether children were welcome. I want to make you an offer, Natalie said. A consulting contract, broader scope than just the grand view. I have 4 other properties. All of them show signs of the same problem surfaces: maintained substance failing. I want you to audit them, but not for compliance, for truth. What do you mean? I want you to check if they're actually accessible. Not in terms of code compliance, but in terms of actual service. If I showed up in a wheelchair to any of those properties, would the staff treat me well? Would they assume I belonged there, or would they make the same calculations? Devon made, Marcus understood. She wanted to know if her staff would discriminate. She wanted the truth, not the sanitized version that compliance paperwork provided. That's going to upset people, Marcus said. I know, Natalie said. But I want them upset. I want them thinking about why they're upset. I want every person in every building I own to understand that this is what happens when you forget that every person matters. She named a salary figure. Marcus had to work not to show his reaction. It was more than double what he'd made at his old job. It was the kind of money that changed things. That meant Emma could go to better schools. That meant he didn't have to be constantly terrified of how he was going to make the next month work. And in exchange, Marcus asked, in exchange you help me build something different. Something where doing the right thing is what you actually get, not what you do when nobody's looking. Marcus thought about his old job. About the moment he'd realized that the company culture wasn't going to change just because he pointed out what was broken. About the choice he'd made to leave and take his daughter somewhere she could feel safe. I need to be home for Emma, he said. Most of the time. That's not negotiable. I know, Natalie said. That's why I'm offering you this. You can work on your schedule. You can be where you need to be. But I need someone who actually cares about whether things work right. I need someone who can't look away. Okay, Marcus said finally. I'll do it. It was that simple. And that complicated. And when Emma came back upstairs and saw something different in her father's face, she took his hand and asked, "Did something good happen?" "Yeah," Marcus said, looking at Natalie. "I think maybe it did." 3 weeks into the consulting contract, Marcus stood in a restaurant across the lobby from the Meridian Hotel with a notepad in his hand and a sick feeling in his stomach. The feeling was familiar. It was the feeling he got every time. He understood how thoroughly a system had been allowed to fail. Natalie wheeled through the lobby in unremarkable clothes and the same practical wheelchair. She'd dressed down on purpose. No designer subtlety. Just working class, careful. She had a reservation under her own name. The system had flagged it as accessible accommodation. She was about to find out if that meant anything. Emma sat at the table with Marcus, coloring methodically in a book, but mostly watching her father work. She was learning Marcus realized, learning how he checked if people were good, learning the invisible assessment. That happened when he looked at a building and understood its failures. He watched Natalie approach the front desk. He watched the receptionist's face shift through the same calculations Devon's had. Wheelchair first, then the assessment. That this was a problem to be managed. He watched the subtle implication in the man's voice. This is not the kind of guest we expected. The lobby path to the elevator had a decorative plant, positioned in a way that made navigation difficult. Natalie maneuvered around it without comment. The accessible room, Marcus had already inspected it, had grab bars positioned incorrectly. They looked good. They wouldn't actually help anyone. They were window dressing, in a quiet side corridor, away from the main desk. Marcus appeared beside her with his notepad. He'd trained himself not to look angry about these things. Anger was what got you fired. Understanding was what kept you working. The receptionist assumed you were a problem to be solved, he said quietly. The plant in the lobby is a fire hazard and an accessibility violation. The grab bars will injure someone with actual upper body weakness. The accessible room is designed for people who need accommodation, not for people who actually need to function independently. Natalie said nothing for a moment. Then, what do we do? You send them a notification, Marcus said. Full audit coming in 1 week. No advance prep. See how panic performs. And if they fail? They will fail, Marcus said. They're already failing. The only question is whether you're going to let them keep doing it. Natalie wheeled herself to face him directly. I'm not sure I know how to use this power right, she said quietly. I've spent my whole life being strategic about everything. I know how to observe, how to plan, how to execute. But I don't know how to actually care about people without controlling them. What if I mess this up? What if I make things worse? Then you figure out you were wrong and you fix it, Marcus said. That's what you do. You fix it. He thought about his old job, about the moment he'd realized that just seeing what was broken wasn't enough. You had to be willing to face the consequences of telling the truth. You had to choose integrity, even when it cost you. Just start by not controlling it, he said. Just ask people to do better and see if they're willing. 8 weeks into the consulting contract, Natalie came to Marcus's apartment for the first time. The apartment was small. A bedroom for Emma. A bedroom for Marcus. A living room that was also the dining room. A kitchen that was large enough for 2 people to move through, if they were careful. It was the size of a place for people who had decided which things mattered and which did not. Natalie brought nothing. No wine, no flowers, no gesture of the kind that was supposed to happen. When you were entering someone's intimate space for the first time, the absence of gesture was somehow more respectful than if she'd brought something expensive. It suggested she understood that this was Marcus's space, and she was entering it on his terms. They ate simple pasta with tomato sauce at the worn kitchen table. Emma drew mechanical systems while they ate. The heating system, the water system, the electrical system. She was learning how buildings worked, learning to see them the way her father did. "Are you going to be here a lot?" Emma asked, not looking up from her drawing. Natalie was quiet for a moment. That was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. Not the answer Emma's father probably wanted her to give. The actual truth? "I don't know yet," she said, "because I'm not sure I know how to be in someone's life without controlling it. Because I've been alone for a long time. Because your father makes me want to be better, and that's terrifying." Emma looked up from her drawing. She was 6 years old, and she was capable of understanding truth when she heard it. "That's okay," she said seriously. "Dad says scared is just how you feel before you get brave." After Emma was in bed, Marcus reading to her as he did every night, a ritual they'd maintained through everything else that had changed. He and Natalie stood in the small kitchen, cleaning up. They moved around each other, with the ease of people who'd already started figuring out how to share space. "She's remarkable," Natalie said finally. "She is," Marcus said, "and she's also protective of me. If you're going to be in our lives, you need to know that. She's going to test you. She's going to make sure you're not going to hurt me." "I know," Natalie said, "and she should." "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, turning to face her. "We keep working together. We figure out if this is something real, we test each other and see if we can actually build something." "I want to," Natalie said, and then more quietly, "I'm trying something different. Being honest, letting people see me, not controlling the outcome." Marcus didn't move to kiss her. He just looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he looked at broken systems, like he was seeing the problem and the solution at the same time, and understanding that they were inseparable. "Okay," he said. "We try." 6 months into the consulting contract, Marcus was sitting in a board meeting. At Natalie's company. He didn't have a business degree. He didn't have experience in corporate governance. He had integrity, and he knew how to see what was broken, and he knew how to fix things that other people had decided were permanently damaged. In the meeting discussing expansion strategy for the property portfolio, Natalie said, "I want Marcus on the board." The executives exchanged glances. David Chen cleared his throat. "With respect, Natalie, we usually require certain educational qualifications. Typically an MBA or..." "I know what we usually require," Natalie said, "and I'm changing it. We usually require credentials that have nothing to do with actual capability. Marcus's capability is that he cares whether things actually work. That's what's missing in every room like this. He's on the board." She looked at Marcus. "But you have to say yes. I can't force you into a room you don't want to be in." Marcus, who'd felt like an imposter in that conference room, who'd been acutely aware of his worn jacket, and his rough hands, and the systems engineer background, that the executives clearly didn't consider legitimate, heard what she was offering, not charity, authority, a voice, a claim that he belonged, in decisions about how these buildings would be used. "I'll observe for one meeting," he said. "After that, I decide." Emma's presence became normalized in their shared life over the following months. She had a drawer at Natalie's apartment with her own things, clothes, books, the art supplies she used for her mechanical drawings. She had a toothbrush in Natalie's bathroom. She had a space. And one day after school, Emma brought home a form. She handed it to Marcus without much fanfare. "I need to add emergency contacts," she said. She handed another form to Natalie. Marcus looked at Emma's form. In the emergency contact section, in Emma's careful 6-year-old handwriting, she'd listed Natalie Ashford. In the relationship box, she'd written family. Natalie held her form like it was made of glass. She didn't speak for a long moment. Emma Marcus said gently, "We talked about checking with me before I know," Emma said. "But it's true, she's family. She lives with us. She knows my school and my drawing and how buildings work. She's family." Natalie's hands had gone still on the paper. "The school might call and ask for clarification," she said finally, "about what relationship we have." "Tell them we're figuring it out," Natalie said, looking at Emma. But Emma's right. It's family, whatever shape that takes. Later, after Emma was asleep, Natalie sat in the kitchen with Marcus. She pulled out her own phone and opened her emergency contact list. For years, it had been empty. No one to call if something went wrong. No one who needed to know if she didn't come home. She added Emma's name, then Marcus's. Made them both official. Made the choice mutual, and documented, and real. "I've never had family," she said quietly. "Not like this. Not where it just happens. Not because of obligation or money or strategy." "You have it now," Marcus said. "But it comes with homework, help in art projects, and a 6-year-old who will tell you when you're being controlling." "I can live with that," Natalie said. She looked at the names on her phone's screen. Emma Webb, Marcus Webb, 2 people who'd come into her life. Because she'd made the choice to see what was actually happening in her buildings, to feel what it was like to be invisible, even with power and money and the careful control. 2 people who'd seen her past that invisibility, past the power and the money and the careful control. "Now it's official on both sides," she said. 6 weeks of audits across all of Natalie's properties revealed a pattern. That made Marcus sick with recognition. It was the same pattern he'd tried to fight at his old job. Staff trained to disappear problems rather than fix them. Accessibility treated as a legal requirement rather than an ethical imperative. Maintenance deferred because the people making the decisions didn't experience the consequences. At the Meridian, the receptionist who'd subtly discouraged Natalie had been terminated. At the Grandview, Devon Carter was gone. The pattern was consistent. Those who'd been trained to categorize and dismiss had been replaced with people willing to think about what actual service meant. But that was only the beginning. Natalie began a comprehensive renovation of the Grandview, undertaken without announcement, completed without ceremony. The main entrance was rebuilt. The new ramp met the required gradient precisely. The entrance doors were wider. The approach paths to each elevator on every floor were fitted with the appropriate tactile indicators. 4 accessible rooms instead of 1, not hiding in service corridors, where guests wouldn't have to see them. Marcus oversaw the technical implementation. He worked with contractors who understood that building for actual accessibility meant thinking about how people actually moved through space, not just complying with minimum standards. He fixed the 3 failing components. Natalie had identified that first night, then the 12 others. He discovered afterward, then the dozens more. That revealed themselves as he worked deeper into the building systems. The compliance documentation was framed in the service corridor, not the lobby. Natalie's deliberate choice. Fix it quietly. Let the work speak for itself. The point wasn't to advertise. that they were finally meeting basic standards. The point was that meeting basic standards should have been the baseline all along. Emma helped when she could, learning to read the blueprints, understanding the way systems connected, seeing how a failure in one place cascaded into failures everywhere else. She was 8 years old, and she understood buildings, the way some children understood music. "Why do people design buildings that hurt people?" she asked one afternoon, watching her father work. "Because they don't think about people they're not," Marcus said. "They build for people like them, and they assume everyone else will figure it out." "That's dumb," Emma said. "It is," Marcus agreed. "It's also fixable." When the renovation was complete, Natalie stood in the new entrance and looked at the ramp for a long time. "We did this," she said. "You paid for it," Marcus said. "I fixed it." Emma understood what it meant. Everyone played their part. 1 year after that first night at the Grandview, Marcus stood at the entrance and looked at the ramp, not inspecting it. He'd already done that 5 times, not calculating whether it was structurally sound, or properly gradient, or meeting code, just looking, holding the image of it, understanding what it represented. The city moved past without pausing, indifferent to the specific weight of any building's history. Behind him the doors opened. He didn't turn immediately. He knew the sound of the wheelchair, the particular sound of someone he'd learned to hear without looking. "The panel in the West Service corridor," Natalie said, coming to a stop beside him. "I saw the scheduling notice. You're replacing it again." "Components failing," Marcus said. "Better to do it before it becomes catastrophic." "That's always your answer," Natalie said. "Fix it before it breaks completely." "It works for buildings," Marcus said. "Works for people too, I think." They stood there together, looking at the ramp, the new surface, the correct grade, the clean functional lines of a thing repaired properly and holding up under daily use. "I want to expand," Natalie said. "I've been thinking about it. There are other owners, other properties. If we can transform one building, prove that it's possible, maybe we can do it on a larger scale." "You want to build an architecture consulting firm specifically for accessibility?" Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "I want to build something that shows it's possible to do this right," Natalie said. "That profit and ethics don't have to be opposed. That buildings can be beautiful and functional, and actually welcoming to everyone." The door opened again, and Emma came through it, at the speed of a child, who'd been sitting still for too long. She stopped between them, looked at the ramp, then looked up at Natalie. "We fixed it," she said. Not a question, a statement of fact, a moment of understanding that the 3 of them had participated in something larger than just one building. "We did," Natalie said. Emma took her father's hand, then, without appearing to deliberate, she took Natalie's sleeve, the same light, uncalculated touch she'd offered in the corridor almost a year ago. None of them moved for a moment. The city went on around them. The building held. The systems that had been broken were fixed. The people who'd been invisible had been seen. And the ramp, simple, correct, accessible, became not an afterthought or a legal requirement, but what it was supposed to have been all along, a genuine invitation to belong. What happened after was less dramatic than what had come before, but in some ways it was more important. Natalie's architectural consulting firm expanded. Not quickly, but deliberately. They started with her own properties, systematizing the audit and repair process that Marcus had pioneered. Every building got the same treatment: full accessibility audit, actual service testing, comprehensive renovation, no corners cut. Then word spread. Other hotel chains started reaching out. Property management companies realized that what Natalie was doing wasn't just ethical, it was also profitable. Buildings that actually welcomed everyone, brought in more customers, staff that treated all guests with respect, had better retention, systems that were maintained properly, lasted longer and cost less to replace. Devin Carter, the shift manager, from that first night, became a cautionary tale in hospitality industry circles. His termination wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was inevitable. After the Grandview, other guests came forward, with stories of similar treatment. People started looking at the buildings he'd worked in and asking questions. It was never going to be the career he'd thought he was building. Marcus never spoke publicly about that night. He didn't want credit. He wanted buildings that worked, and people who were treated with dignity, and systems that actually functioned, instead of just appearing to. Emma, now 8, was learning to read architectural schematics. She spent time at both her parents' offices, because that's what they were now, offices and partners, and something that looked like family, even if the shape of it wasn't traditional. She was the daughter of a systems engineer and a property owner, and she understood both the technical and human dimensions of how buildings were supposed to work. In her school project folder, there was a drawing of the Grandview. She'd labeled it, "Big buildings that let you in. Some buildings keep people out. My dad and Natalie fix buildings so everybody can be inside." When Emma's teacher had asked her about that, Emma had explained, "My dad says buildings are just like people, if you listen to what they're trying to tell you, and if you actually care about making them better. You can fix them." Marcus had cried when he read that. The firm grew. 1 year after that first night, Natalie had contracts with 7 properties. 2 years after it was 19. 5 years after they'd transformed 40 buildings. Across 3 states. The firm's reputation wasn't built on cutting corners or finding the cheapest solutions. It was built on actually caring whether things worked. Natalie eventually went back to school, not for an MBA. She already knew how to run a business. But for architecture. She wanted to understand the theory behind what Marcus had been teaching her through experience. She wanted to sit at a table and understand the decisions that led to spaces that excluded people. And then she wanted to make different decisions. Emma asked her once, "Do you miss being the secret owner? Being able to watch people without them knowing?" "No," Natalie said. "I like being seen better. I like people knowing what I'm trying to do, and being able to choose whether to be part of it." The Grandview became a case study. In hospitality education, architecture schools used it as an example of what was possible when someone decided to fix things instead of accept them. It wasn't famous in the way hotels usually were. It didn't have a viral moment or a celebrity endorsement. It was just quietly, consistently good. On the 5th anniversary of that first night, Marcus and Natalie stood at the entrance again. Emma was with them, now 11, talking about her own plans for her future. She was thinking about being both a systems engineer and an architect, which she'd decided was definitely possible, because she had 2 parents who believed in fixing broken things. "Do you remember," Natalie said to Marcus, "what you told me in the service corridor that first night?" "Which part?" Marcus asked. "Everyone matters, or no one does." "I remember. I've been thinking about that," Natalie said, "about the weight of it. If everyone matters, that changes everything. It changes how you design buildings. It changes who you hire. It changes what you're willing to accept as normal. It changes what you're willing to look away from." "It does," Marcus said. "That was the point. That's always been the point." The sun was setting, hitting the ramp at an angle that made the new surface glow slightly. It was functional. It was beautiful. It was an invitation that actually meant something. Emma took her father's hand, and then her mother's sleeve, the same gesture from a year ago, but with more confidence now. She knew this was her family. She knew that what they'd done, fixing one building, changing how one piece of the world worked, had ripples that extended far beyond what they could see. "Can we get dinner?" she asked. "There's this new restaurant downtown, and the owner called Dad to check if it was accessible before it opened. Because he wanted to get it right," Emma said. Not because he had to. That was the real victory, Marcus thought. Not that they'd exposed Devin Carter, or that the Grandview had been transformed, but that somewhere in the city, a restaurant owner was thinking about whether his building actually welcomed people. That the simple act of seeing what was broken and refusing to accept it had created a space where others might start to see it too. The ripples extended outward, one building at a time, one person at a time, one conversation about what was actually right, not what was merely legal, or acceptable, or convenient. 10 years after that first evening at the Grandview, Marcus stood in his own office, not Natalie's firm. This was his name on the door, his reputation driving the work, his choice after years of partnership, to build something that was his own vision. The vision was simple: buildings that actually worked, infrastructure that was maintained, because it mattered, not because it was convenient, spaces designed for actual human beings, not theoretical ideal guests. That didn't account for disability, poverty, age, or any of the ways real people moved through the world. Emma was 17 now. She was applying to architecture schools and systems engineering programs. She was planning to spend her career doing what her parents had shown her, seeing what was broken, and refusing to accept that it had to stay broken. Natalie had become something between an entrepreneur and an advocate. She gave talks at industry conferences about the business case for accessibility. She'd written a book about the 18 months she'd spent observing her properties before deciding to actually do something about what she'd seen. The book had unexpectedly become a bestseller in business circles. Turns out there were more people wondering if their success could come with integrity than anyone had realized. In the Grandview's lobby, where it had all started, there was a plaque now, not about the renovation, not about Marcus or Natalie, just a simple statement: every person matters. A young employee had asked Natalie once what it meant. It means, she'd said, that we don't get to decide who deserves to be here. The Grandview wasn't the most famous hotel anymore. It wasn't famous at all, really. It was just quietly, consistently good. The kind of place where every guest was treated with the same respect, where accessibility wasn't an afterthought, where systems worked because someone cared enough to maintain them. Marcus thought about that young man who'd lost his job 14 months before that fateful Tuesday evening, about the fear of not knowing how he'd keep his daughter safe, about the weight of feeling like the systems of the world were designed to push people like him out. And he thought about how one choice, to step in, to see, to refuse to accept that this was how things had to be, had rippled outward in ways he couldn't have predicted. Emma called him from her university campus. She was researching her senior thesis on accessible architectural standards. She wanted to know if he remembered specific details about the Grandview renovation. "I remember all of it," he said. "Why do you think Natalie stepped in that night?" Emma asked. "In the wheelchair testing the staff. She could have just hired an inspector." Because Marcus said. She needed to feel it, not just know it. Understanding in your head and understanding in your body are different things. Until you've experienced what it feels like to be invisible, even with power and money, you don't really understand what you're fixing. "That makes sense," Emma said. "I've been thinking about that a lot. How you can't really build for people you're not willing to understand. How the designing part only works if you actually care about the people it affects." "That's right," Marcus said. "Dad," Emma asked, "do you ever regret it? Speaking up that night? It changed everything." "No," Marcus said immediately. "I regret all the times I didn't speak up. I regret every time I looked away. But that night, I got it right. After he hung up, Marcus went back to reviewing blueprints for a new project, a community center in a neighborhood that had been historically neglected. The city had built one accessible entrance on the side. Marcus was redesigning it, so the main entrance was fully accessible, so people didn't have to enter through the back of a building, like an afterthought. It was the work of his life now, not grudge work or charity work, just the work of building systems that actually served people, the work of seeing what was broken and fixing it, and somewhere in the city, in offices and homes and buildings that had been transformed by the simple decision to care. There were ripples, people treating each other with dignity, buildings that actually worked, systems that had been fixed because someone refused to accept that they had to stay broken. This was what it meant to defend a stranger in a wheelchair. It wasn't about one moment of heroism. It was about a choice to see and a commitment to keep seeing and a willingness to act on what you'd seen. It was about understanding that everyone matters. It was about refusing to look away.